Triangulation is, in fact, a way we communicate anger. It is very common, and it is hidden anger. It doesn't look like yelling, but it's hidden anger over a really long time. Find out if you've got hidden anger, because it'll release a lot of anger in your life. You're listening to the Bear in Mind Podcast, episode 162.
A podcast that breaks it down so you can break the cycle for good. Now, your host, Tara Rama, but you can call her T.
Triangulation, as you can see in the word, is about a triangle. 3 people, and 3 people are, in fact, communicating. So one person wants to communicate to another person, but they bring in somebody else to do that communication. That is triangulation. And we can do this in very simple ways. And I'm not talking about the things where you're saying, hey, can you say hi to that other person? I'm talking about communicating something in a more subtle way to another person that isn't the other person, but you're communicating things that you are upset with, and you're hoping that that other person communicates that message for you. Now, this is a little tricky. I think that some of the frustration we feel in communication has a lot to do with triangulation, and because it's very difficult to see. And until somebody pointed it out to me in a book, I didn't see it. And it is, in fact, one of the most common ways that we communicate anger when we are not understanding our anger, when we don't even know that we're feeling it, but it's there. And my family and also my husband's family use triangulation to communicate. It is actually a very common way. And in my husband's family, nobody yells at each other, but triangulation is used to communicate somebody else's if they're upset. Sometimes it's done very direct, triangulation, and sometimes it's very subtle. So if you look at triangulation, it almost seems like you need to stop talking through the other person and talk directly to that person. But that is something that's very difficult for the number one reason is we don't even know we're doing it. And 2, you need to get at the anger and find out what it is. And usually if we have a pattern of triangulation, that hidden anger has been going on for a long time. We've been suffering from being upset. And it's something that I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I had grown up in an environment like this. And it can be as subtle as, and I have a very specific example. I looked at an old, and this is really, really old email. And I looked back at some of my old communications with friends. And when I was looking at those mutual friends, so I was in contact with a friend and I hadn't heard back from her. But then another friend, a mutual friend of ours, we were exchanging messages. And I mentioned to her that this other friend hadn't gotten back to me. Oh, I contacted her, but she hasn't gotten back to me. And it may not seem like full-blown anger, but why did I go and tell my other friend who's not part of this exchange, not part of this conversation, only that we know each other? And it's really subtle that you think you're communicating information about somebody else, but really what you're doing is you're communicating your opinion, your thought, your belief about what's happening with another person to somebody else. And this happens, it seems almost like it's natural, especially in families and their siblings, and the parents are talking to one and the sibling will say, I didn't hear back from this person. And it's almost like you can talk directly to that person. If you're already in communication with one person, then communicate back to the other person that hasn't gotten back to you. So you can kind of see some of those dynamics play out with siblings and parents, and they're all trying to communicate. And they're communicating through each other rather than saying, hey, I'm kind of irritated that you didn't get back to me. It might not be full-blown anger. And that's why I say hidden anger can be kind of this, it's hidden and it can be small, almost like you don't want to deal with it. And then it builds and builds and builds. And we're the ones that are suffering. If you build and build irritation, it becomes small little types of resentment towards somebody. If you haven't resolved it, if you haven't felt the anger and come to some sort of resolution on, I'm going to feel the anger and I'm going to be fine with it and I accept that, or anger is telling me a message and I want to do something about it, and we haven't drawn that resolution for ourselves. And so the anger is staying with us, maybe in a very small amount, and then it builds and builds and builds. And then we maybe don't have a tendency to yell through our anger, but we have a tendency to communicate through our children, maybe to our partner. We can do this. And we often see this in divorced families where one parent will say something to the children about the other parent and subtly hoping to direct some of that opinion about the other parent. And it's not done at a very conscious level. It's all subconscious. We think it's just communicating information. We also can think it's communicating a fact, even though it's not a fact. Our opinions aren't facts. Now, since it's so subtle, it's often one of those things we can't recognize in ourselves. And I literally had to go back to old emails to see how I communicated and to see the fact that I was doing this and I wasn't even aware, because it was bothering me that other family members were doing this. They were triangulating messages to me. My aunt was communicating to me about my mother. And it was like, okay, my mother can communicate directly to me. And that is something that's very difficult to see. So I'm going to come at it from when you recognize it. So if you're new to this concept, it might be easier to see somebody else do it to you, talk to you through somebody else, and they're talking to you about somebody else and trying to communicate something to you. And, like my aunt saying, oh, you didn't get back to your mom. She's like really worried. And here's the thing, that person's message, how I look at it, is they're communicating this to me, especially if it's adult to adult. I'm not talking about children, adult to adult. They're communicating this to me. I don't know the validity of that information. And that's kind of how I went through it. It seems almost a little on the harsh side, because it very well could be actually that my mom said the words, I'm worried, but I don't have that information. I don't have that factual information. So I would really like that other person to communicate that to me. And I started to not do anything by messages. I would react to these messages from other people, by the way. I would try to course correct and jump on it and communicate with that person. And I decided not to do anything. And that is how I started from triangulation. I didn't exactly look at my own triangulation because it's harder to see. But what I did is when people were communicating about other people to me, I immediately in my head, okay, this is not factual information. And I even do that today socially when we have mutual friends. Like someone will say something about somebody and I'll be like, I don't know if that's true in my head. I'll decide for myself. And I feel actually so much powerful when I think, oh, I'll decide what to think about that friend. I'll decide if that's true. I'll wait to hear it from my friend if that information is true. And it's not that I negate the person or I go out and say, hey, you're communicating false information, because they could very well be communicating real, genuine, truthful information to you. I hold off and I say, okay, I want to hear it from, there's that expression, I want to hear it from the horse's mouth first. And I'll hold off on my opinion about it or doing anything about it. So that's kind of how I've approached triangulation. It still happens today. It happens in friend groups. It happens in families. That is where I started. And if you want to look at triangulation, there's hidden anger in your life. It starts by knowing what you're feeling. So go back to that episode, know what you're feeling. because you can hone into yourself to know if little things bother you, little irritations, little frustrations that happen. And it's okay. They're not anything that's a big deal. Sometimes I can notice a little irritation that a friend didn't get back to me. Oh, I needed to know that so I can book something, or she didn't get back to me. And I notice some of those little things, and that comes from knowing how you're feeling, as opposed to trying to go and correct it on the end side. I'm going to stop triangulating, stop doing this. It's almost the same thing as stop yelling. It's knowing that feeling, understanding your feelings and getting it at the root cause, and understanding the kind of, what I would say, everyday little things that happen to you, some of the nuanced things. And you don't have to label it as irritation or frustration. It's understanding that sensation that's in your body. And you don't have to label it, but you can understand that sensation. Oh, I feel a little odd about this. I feel a little off about what happened. And that's how you can begin to start to communicate how you want to communicate in your relationships, how you want to communicate with your children, with your partner. And then that will kind of resolve the triangulation instead of going at it from the triangulation aspect. That's all I have for you this week. I'll check back with you next.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.